Cost of the license, however, isn't the only cost involved. There are other costs to consider, and I'm going to run through a few of those. Obviously, there's the development costs. In a typical CMS deployment, we would see something like 25% of the cost would be around purchasing a license for a licensed product, and 75% would be around developing the solution and deploying it to the site. So that the bulk of the expenditure is going to go in building the website, not in procuring the CMS as a general rule. There are some other costs. I don't maintain this with my pliers, by the way. There are some other costs that you need to consider around maintenance. So most CMS vendors have a maintenance policy where they'll renew a maintenance subscription to their license. Typically buys you things like upgrades, updates, additional development licenses, maybe licenses for testing and so on. They run at around about 20% to 30% of the purchase price of the license. But there are other, again, costs associated with that, or things to bear in mind around that is what does it cover? If you are going to do an upgrade, then there's the cost of doing the upgrade itself. We've just done a major upgrade for a transport operator that has a tunnel. It's taken us 6 weeks to do it. We've had to do it under enormous constraints, so we're not allowed to have a content freeze that lasts more than 2 hours. We're not allowed to have a code freeze that lasts more than a day. We've had to do it across 9 server environments, I believe. So the costs of doing that are not insignificant and should be borne in mind as a part of the cost of ownership of the CMS. So the sort of moral is to look at all aspects of the cost, not just the cost of the license, the cost of the development, the cost of maintenance, the cost of upgrades. The whole life cycle of the project needs to be borne in mind. So the moral of the story is to always read the fine print, to always look at the devil is in the detail, to always look at all of the hidden costs, all of the unexpected costs that might be around the project. So, a word in your ear, Nate.
Okay, so can you keep a secret? Well, there's actually a lot of secrets. I'm actually a woman, if anybody hasn't noticed. Only at weekends. The good news is that if you are sufficiently informed and if you are working with the right people, you can make sure that you get value for money, you get the good deal and a successful solution in the end. And the key to that is having knowledge of how things work and what the procedures and policies are, as well as cultural things within the different organizations. So we talk about, arm yourself with information. In certain situation, I'm just going to go back to this. So because we've got a background in actually selling web content management solutions, with our clients, when we help them acquire solutions, we help them make significant savings. We also help them evade a lot of the, should we say, sometimes negative sales tactics that can be applied. The important thing to understand is that your partner that's going to be with you throughout the implementation of that site, their job is done once your website is deployed and once your project is successful. A CMS vendor is there selling you technology and license. Their job is done as soon as you've signed a purchase agreement and got that license. So you really do need to align yourself with the right partners and with the right information to make sure that you don't get caught in the sales pitch, should we say, rather than make an informed decision. And there are a lot of sources of information that you can use, your partner being only one. Analysts is another one. Norman, do you want to talk a little bit more about Analysts?
So just back to the point about the can you keep a secret? One of the secrets you should bear in mind is that most CMS vendors work to an accounting period. If they're a European vendor, typically of a quarter. If they're an American vendor, it's a month and a quarter. So if you are going to buy a CMS, buying it at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, you can make considerable savings in terms of getting discounts from the supplier. I worked for an American CMS vendor where the week between Christmas and New Year was their busiest period of the year because their financial year end was December 31st. And if you went in there to buy a CMS during that 1 week, you could typically get 50% off the license price. So understanding how the industry works gives you an edge over the sales guy that's trying to sell you the CMS. Nedge mentioned arming yourself with information, and we just wanted to look at a couple of ways that you can do that. One of them is through the analysts. There are a number of analysts out there that, shall we say, give an opinion about various CMS products within the market space. Perhaps one of the best known is the Gartner Magic Quadrant, since they've found a very, shall we say, a very neat way to express the relative merits of the different products. But there's a number of others. There's even some that specialise in CMS that are not on there, people like CMS Watch. The analyst business is a little bit internecine. What they tend to do is they'll go and visit one vendor and say, what are you guys planning to do next year? We hear they're going to do this. And then they'll go to the other vendor and say, well, this guy told us he was going to build one of those. Have you got plans to do that? And by that sort of means, they tend to sort of push the industry along a path. So there's a little bit of a blur between whether the analysts are actually reporting on the industry and providing information on the industry, or whether they're actually trying to push it in a particular direction themselves. As I say, it's a little bit internecine, incestuous, the relationship between the vendors and the analysts. Other sources of information, of course, the vendor websites, the vendors themselves. They're only too anxious to tell you about their products. You do have to be a little bit careful looking at vendor supplied information. Of course, they will exaggerate claims about their products. But nevertheless, it's a good way to do it. You can, in many cases, you can get trials, especially for the cheaper systems. For the lower-end systems, you can download trial copies to test. For the higher-end systems, they tend to have moved away from that strategy over recent years, preferring instead to take on the role of a sort of cozying up to the client, a partnership approach to selling rather than a software, rather than simply just pushing boxes.
So I mentioned briefly, whose interest is to sell your license, whose interest is it to make your website successful, etc. Again, we just wanted to elaborate on that a little bit further. But there have been situations where we've had clients that have purchased a certain solution, and it comes to a maintenance period, and in order, they've got to renew, but they didn't read the small print, and there's a new sales team at the vendors who need to get more revenue and need to hit their sales target. And when things aren't going too well in terms of new business, the existing client base is often a good source of additional revenue. And to give you one example, we recently had one client where they were contacted by a new account manager from a CMS vendor that they haven't heard from in 2 years since they bought their license, and they were told that in order for them to maintain what they've got to go from a 2-server environment to a 16-server environment. So either buy an additional 14 server licenses or go and rebuild your website elsewhere. In that situation, we assisted that particular client, and we knew, we were involved in a lot of the terms and conditions and negotiations during the purchase, and we helped them evade any additional purchase. And the only way we did that is we would basically tell them, what questions to ask, what clauses to point out in a particular contract, and so on. So there's a lot of hidden costs, but the important thing is that, you know, unless there is potential revenue from you coming into a particular vendor, chances are there's very little interest in how successful or unsuccessful you are. Again, we talk about partners and is your website in safe hands? Well, when selecting the right partner, if you've got the right partner involved throughout the dialogue and the CMS selection process, there's a lot more chance that the project is going to go smoothly and successfully, because of the fact that the partner's going to do their due diligence, and not only are you making sure that the organization is selecting the right CMS, you're making sure, and the partner's making sure, the agency's making sure that they've got the skill set to work with that technology, that there's sufficient support to your partners and agencies from that particular vendor to make them successful, and ultimately aligning your objectives along with your partner's objectives is the key. As long as those two things are aligned, then as a single team, you're going out there and almost battling the CMS world, so to speak. Very importantly, and I say this to a lot of clients, speak to your agency or your technical team, your IT people, before you get into the dialogue. CMS tools or content management, we say systems, I prefer solutions, are really a lot more than just content management systems. They really are marketing automation tools. So you've got to be aware, as soon as you have looked at a particular product, inquired about a particular product, you have already been created as a lead in a CRM system of some vendor, and you are already in a sales process. And the way in which certain things are going to be positioned and sold and pushed and targeted to you is going to be based on a persona that the technology is building gradually about you. So the important thing is that, you know, as soon as you are in dialogue, it seems like you're going through a consultative process, but you need to be aware that you are very much in a sales process. And I think that, in my experience, that the CMS sales world is probably one of the most aggressive and competitive sales, should we say sales in terms of sales style, out of all the different IT industries. I mean, I've worked in sales in a number of industries, but CMS has been by far the most competitive. So, how to make the right choice? So again, make sure that you are thinking about what your business needs and matching the CMS capabilities with what your business needs, rather than determining your digital strategy based on what your CMS can do. Be aware of all the costs that are involved, and make sure that you future-proof your solution. So typically, a website has a 3 to 5 year life cycle before it goes through a major overhaul, a major refresh. Make sure that the technology you're looking at can meet your requirements in the short term, but it can also support your digital strategy moving forward until you are at a point where you can reasonably do a review. Make sure you've got the right documentation. Make sure you have all the tools that you need to be successful. You'd be very surprised by the amount of complex technologies out there without any user guides and user documentation. There is, for most technology providers, there's usually a lot more document writing going into marketing than is into actual technical documentation and documents that help that are there to give you a particular knowledge. So I think this one's back to you, Norman. I think I started Norman's slide here.
Sorry. So just to cover a couple of things that Ned skipped over briefly there. Don't get caught by surprise. Always read the small print. Look for the contract. Look carefully at the contracts, particularly with regards to things like maintenance and updates, upgrades. Make sure that for example, that the maintenance is linked to the price you paid, not to the list price of the product. We've seen customers get burnt when they come along to pay their 20%, and oh no, it's not 20% it's not 20% of what you paid, it's 20% of the current list price, which might be considerably more. Always negotiate. You're in a strong position, particularly if you can time your purchase. And like I said, at the end of the quarter, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, you've got the advantage because the sales guy in the CMS shop is desperate for your business to close his month-end numbers. Do your research and look for impartial sources. Look at the analyst reports, look at the vendor literature by all means, seek advice from implementation partners. As Nedge mentioned, documentation is important. And finally, watch out for targeted marketing. Remember that you're the victim of the marketing automation that you're about to purchase, as well as the purchaser of it. So as I said, be careful of the wolf, of course, is the sales guy down at the CMS shop. I must admit to being one at one time. So watch out for the wolf in sheep's clothing.
I think just another point on here. You will. I mentioned that you'll be led through a so-called consultative sales process, but make sure that the people that you are speaking to about technology actually have the right knowledge and understanding of the technology. Simple things like asking the sales guy to give you a brief demonstration of the product is a great start. There's a lot of people selling big solutions that they've never used or don't know anything about. So it's important to have the right technical expertise during that sales process to also ask the right questions. Okay, so I think that's summarized. You'll be pleased to know that we've pretty much come to the end of our presentation. We are at stand D64, which is about 5 meters to my left. We've got a little bit of a competition going on, so if you enter, we're giving away a Pebble watch. We hope you'll all do that. And these are our contact details. So we've left a few minutes for any questions in the hope that there'll be lots of hands up and more that we can talk about. Is there any questions? Anybody? Please. Thank you.
Yeah, we're currently in the, can you hear me okay, yeah? We're currently in the process of choosing not only a CMS but also a back-end system as well to actually manage the product data. And the decision for the CMS is currently lying with the IT department and not with the marketing department. So
So the question there is, this gentleman is currently going through a selection process where the IT have been tasked with selecting the platform and what are the risks associated with that. IT are a valid stakeholder, and from an IT's perspective, it's from a marketing perspective, marketing can't wait to get to a point where they can do what they want and implement their creative ideas without having to go to the IT team in the back room and wait for them to fulfill their wishes. And IT, at the same time, their objective is to restrict non-technical users from being able to break the website. I think in any scenario where only one party is wholly responsible for the selection, I think there are risks because they are not the key stakeholder. Or they are a key stakeholder, but they're not the only key stakeholder. So I think that at some point during that process, marketing or the users of the system, whether that's a small marketing team or in certain organizations, a large number of journalists or publicists, I think that throughout that process, we would always encourage that all the stakeholders get involved into a dialogue and everybody has some level of approval towards that. You're never going to keep everybody happy, but you shouldn't be excluded wholly out of the process. Any further questions? Okay, well, thank you for joining us, and I hope it's been useful for you.